Today's class is going to be on termite treatment strategy. It will be presented by me, Sean Reeves, a certified entomologist for Reeves Professional Education Services. Thank you for using us, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to allow you to grow in the termite industry. Let's take a look at the learning objectives on our course today. After taking this course, you will be able to explain what a termite treatment strategy is, the initial preparation for termite treatment, calculations for termiticides, application equipment, site preparation for a termite job, how to mix termiticides, and how to apply termiticides. The main benefit of this course is that as a termite inspector or technician, you must know how to properly perform a termite treatment or you will not be successful. First and foremost, I think we need to ask the question, what is a termite treatment strategy? A termite treatment strategy is going to be the primary goal of termite control, which is to prevent termites from entering a structure. There's going to be two ways to achieve this goal. A, we could do what's called a pre-treat, which is a barrier to prevent termites before the structure is completed. Or B, we can do a post-construction treatment, create barriers to prevent termites in an already existing structure. And I think up front, I want to let you know that when you do a pre-treat, that's usually sanctioned by the state and something that's usually required. Depending on what state you're in, when you're in the southeast especially, and even out west, most states are going to require you to do a pre-treat on a new structure before that home can pass all the inspections and be cleared for the people to move in. Post-construction obviously is going to be a little bit different. I think pre-treats are usually not all that good and don't last more than a year, so your post-construction termite treatments is really where most of us focus our time in the industry. This again is going to be building a barrier around the house and on the inside of the house so no new termite entry can happen in the future. Some of you are probably asking, what are the overall steps in a treatment? Let's start out with step one. That would be mechanical alteration. This includes modifications of the structure to prevent termite entry, removal of cellulose and debris, and elimination of moisture problems. And we could spend a lot of time talking about this, but those of you that have been in the industry for a while, you know, number one, you really need to seal off the areas where the termites can enter. This can be cracks, crevices, this can be a lot of different areas. Secondly, removal of cellulose debris is a huge point we need to look at. If you go into a crawl space and you're crawling around and you see wood and scrap pieces of cardboard boxes, maybe when they build these houses, a lot of times, you'll see the guys drinking on the site and they'll literally throw the beer packages down on the ground, paper bags, whatever that is, that's all going to be on the ground, and that's cellulose. Can you imagine when you have cellulose on the ground that obviously the termites being subterranean are coming right up out of the soil and they're getting right on that wood or that cellulose debris. So cellulose is going to be a huge part of what we need to do to keep the termites from coming. So anytime you do a termite treatment, you're going to want to remove all the cellulose debris, especially any that has the wood to soil contact. Also, elimination of moisture problems. How many of you have heard that termites need an extremely high moisture content to be able to live in an area? Well, especially when we're dealing with subterranean termites, they have to have this high moisture content, which is why they don't even live outside of the soil or the wood. So keep in mind, moisture problems are always going to draw termites in. I can't tell you how many times through the years I've went to a house, found a moisture problem, and then dug a little deeper into the wood or maybe removed a little drywall, whatever the case may have been, and bam, the termites were right there in that area. So termites, especially the subterranean variety, love moist wood. Step two, we're going to look at a soil treatment, which is going to be the application of a termiticide to the soil under and next to the structure, creating a chemical barrier. And as you can imagine, obviously a lot of companies have different ideas of what they call this. Some call it a complete termite job. You've probably heard the term perimeter plus. Whatever your goal is in that, the bottom line is that we're basically creating a barrier, especially in the areas where we think the termites are going to come up, because we do want to prevent their entry in the future. I wanted to show you a picture here, what we were talking about in step one. This is a standard crawl space that many of you are going to come across in your years doing termite work. This is actually wood or cellulose debris on the ground. And as you can see here in the picture, there's quite a bit of wood laying there on the ground. Just imagine how easy it is for the subterranean termites to come right up and chew this wood. Basically what you're doing is you're laying a buffet out for them. It's like throwing a raw steak in a backyard full of pit bulls. They're going to attack this wood because it's an easy food source. So this is what we're talking about with mechanical alteration, and this is often missed by pest control and termite companies because they just don't think about it. When you do the treatment, one of the first things you should do is go under and remove all this cellulose debris, because you're really never going to get a real good idea in the future of what's happening with the house itself. And also, if you leave this debris there, you may not get the termites even with the termiticide in the areas you put it, because they're just going to stay right where this nice little food source is. So just keep in mind, this is the area where you want to go under and remove all this debris immediately when you start a termite service. I also wanted to show you a picture of a termite pretreatment. This is your horizontal barrier you spray on the soil as the foundation's being put up or right after it's being put up, before they pour the slabs around it. So this is a picture of the guy actually spraying, and as you can see, it's more of a fan spray. You're going to put about 1 gallon per 10 square feet on this treatment. So if you can imagine, on your average 1,500 square foot home, you're going to use about 150 gallons of termiticide. And one thing that's very important for us to all remember is that most of the time these job sites do not have water on them. So it's a really good idea to go ahead and fill your tank up full of water and not mix the termiticide until you get on the site, because you don't want to have a spill along the way. But this will help you when you get there already have the water you need. Then you can mix your termiticide and you can go ahead and horizontally treat this whole area within the walls. This leads us to step 3, which is going to be a foundation treatment. And that's going to be the application of the termiticide to the actual foundation to make it inaccessible to termite entry. So when we look at a foundation treatment, this can be something as just trenching and treating the outside of a home. It can also mean drilling through a hollow block foundation and then even drilling further through that block up underneath the slab. So keep in mind, that's something that can be a really heavy treatment depending on if you're just doing a perimeter plus or you're doing a full termiticide application where you do the perimeter, treat the hollow block, and then treat all the way up under the foundation. Step 4 would be a wood treatment, and that would be applying a termiticide to the wood within the structure to eliminate existing infestations and make the wood resistant to future infestations. And there's several ways this can be done. I think most of you that have been in the industry have heard of foam, where you actually shoot a foam inside the walls. What the foam does, when you put a little hole in the wall and you shoot it in there, it's almost like the expanding foam you get at a Home Depot or something like that. It actually spreads between those wall studs, and what happens is, as it spreads, termites are trying to walk through it and it actually shuts off their oxygen supply. Another type of wood treatment can be with a borate, and especially when you're dealing with drywood termites, a lot of times you'll see the little kick-out holes in the wall and the pellets. Then you'll drill into those and use a borate type of product like a Timbor or a Boracare. This type of product will go right up into the galleries of the drywood termites and actually shut them down. As we were talking about in step 3, this is more of your foundation treatment here. A lot of us will call it trenching and rodding, and I'll show you in a future slide too, where you actually drill down in the patio slabs and porch slabs. But this trenching and rodding is very important, because this is where you put your trench on the outside of the house, and then you shoot the termiticide all the way down to the footer along the foundation. So what I'm saying is your footer on average is about 12 inches deep. So you would do a 6-inch wide by 6-inch deep trench, and then you would shoot your termiticide at a rate usually of 4 gallons per 10 linear feet all along the house. And that termiticide will actually seep down to that footer. So this basically will give you a full protection all the way down to the footer, because as we know, these subterranean termites are working their way right along, and they'll come up around that footer and get inside the house. The next section we're going to look at in the class is going to be your initial preparation. The initial preparation is going to follow 6 different steps. This is going to be a very important and specific part of your treatment because the initial preparation is going to really tell where you're going to end up in the future. So let's look at step number 1. We want to review the inspection graph. You should read the graph before you leave the office to make sure you understand it. This will also allow you to ask the inspector any questions you have about their findings. And as we well know in this industry, whether it's communication internally in our offices or communication externally with the customers, setting the expectations and that communication is paramount, because if we get out to a job site, if I'm a technician, I'm going to look at things totally different than a sales or service inspector would. And I may miss some of their findings. I may also find things that they didn't see depending on my experience and level of knowledge. So make sure before you leave the office, go to any job on any given day, that you work with your inspector and find out, hey, this is what I saw, or this is what's written on the graph, and I want to make sure you don't miss this. Step 2, complete the pre-application checklist. Most companies are going to require you to fill out a checklist when you get to the work site. This form shows any wells, cisterns, and structures on the property not to be treated. It's of the utmost importance that you make sure that there's not wells or cisterns on the property, because the last thing you want to do is contaminate a well and then have a huge cleanup issue for your company. Also, you'll go to many homes that have sheds on the property, that have horse barns on the property. I can't tell you the different numbers of structures you're going to see. And sales inspectors a lot of times will sell people things, say, hey, we're going to go ahead and throw in the shed on this treatment, or we're going to do some treatment on your horse barn, etc. And they won't tell the technician this. So the technician becomes stuck in this, do I treat this, do I not treat this? So as a company, and I had my own business for 6 years as well as 17 years in the industry, I know we have to make sure everything that needs to be done on that job needs to be detailed on the graph, because the graph is the real historical document that's going to tell us what exactly that home looked like when the sales inspector was there. It's also going to tell us the exact conditions that were all around the area, as well as what buildings or what other structures need to be treated on that property. Okay, I want to talk about the graph itself, because the graph is going to be the most important document on any termite job. And here's a sample graph that I was working on, and you're going to notice some things about my graphs that may be a little bit different than what you're used to. First and foremost, I like using color on my graphs, because I know color is really going to take me further down the road of where I want to go when it comes to explaining to the customer what exactly is going on around their structure. As you'll see on this graph, you're going to see some blue circles on this graph. Blue on my graphs always indicates water areas like gutter downspouts, AC units, anywhere where I think the grade's a little faulty and water might be collecting. So you can see I actually put 4 gutter downspouts on this graph, and that just indicates there's going to be some major water in those areas. As we've well talked about and we all know, that moisture, that water is going to draw the termites in. But also that's going to be a problem on our treatment, because when we put that termiticide to the ground, especially if it's a sandy soil, what do you think is going to happen when that water continuously gets dumped in those areas? Eventually it's going to dilute our termiticide, and it's actually going to become non-effective. Now a lot of companies will do a 5-year or 7-year retreatment on the property where they retreat everything because of this fact. The other thing I want to show you on this graph is there was 2 areas where there was some evidence of termites. On the left side, there were some inactive termite tubes in the crawl space, and then also we've got some termite damage in the center of the house. Red indicates a flag, obviously, so I like to use the color red because that really indicates, hey, this is a red flag, there's a problem here. And when I go in, I can much more easily articulate this to the customer and say, okay, the blue areas are water, the red areas are where we've seen termites, whether they're active or inactive, they've at least been there at some point. You'll see on the outside perimeter of this house, I've also got some green squiggly lines. These squiggly lines indicate ornamentals and plants. So that could be things like plants, ornamentals, mulch. These are areas, again, that can be a problem for termites. as well as a lot of companies doing pest control and termite control now actually sell services for ornamentals and lawns. Well, this is another good thing for you to put on the graph because this can also help you cross-sell other services. So as you'll see on my graph, I've noted several things. Obviously, I've got a wood deck on the right side of the house. This is important, obviously, because that wood deck's there. If we need to trench that area, how are we going to trench it? I can't tell you through the years how many jobs I've been to. Will there be a deck right up against a house with about a 6-inch clearance below it and nobody having a plan of how we're actually going to trench or treat in that area? So obviously you'd have a couple different options, but I think a lot of times we probably pull up the two boards closest to the house, kind of pull them up easily with a little crowbar. We may tell the customer if the wood's really old, it may have to be replaced, but we've definitely got to at least pull it up, treat that area, and either put it back or replace it with new wood, because we have to wrap this whole entire structure to really be effective in termite control. Something else you'll see on my graph, you'll see the little V's with the circles. That would be vents in the crawl space. Vents are important as well because the ventilation in the crawl space is going to tell you a lot about the moisture content in there. If a crawl space is not well vented, you're going to have some major problems, not just with termites. You're going to have brown rot fungi potentially. You're going to have microbial mold growth. So venting and keeping the moisture out of a crawl space is really huge. As a matter of fact, a lot of you have probably heard of crawl space encapsulations now, which has even become code in a lot of cities and even counties, because really you don't want that moisture to ever get in the crawl space. But even if it does, you at least have to have a good vapor barrier on the ground and a good venting system to help keep that moisture from building up. So this is the graph I usually use. Again, it's got more things marked on it than a lot of people would, but I will tell you, when it comes to your professionalism and the way customers view you, these graphs are going to take you a long ways down the road to gaining credibility with your customers, as well as showing the future technicians or whoever comes out there and does an annual inspection, hey, these were the conditions we found. They're pretty blatant with color, so you can see what it looked like a year ago. Now, let's see where it's at as we go through our future inspections. As we continue talking about our initial preparation, I can tell you step 3 is going to be probably as important as anything you're going to do. Meet the homeowner. You want to do this as soon as you reach the site. Make sure that the homeowner understands the treatment and you answer any of their questions. And this is something that I really try to do as soon as I pull up to a home. I get out, I meet the homeowner, because even if I sit in my truck for a half hour and start doing some things, they're looking out the window, they're wondering what's going on. So a good practice is go up and meet the homeowner and then explain to them what you're going to do. You set the expectations and then answer any of their questions. A lot of homeowners will say, okay, that's great, just do your thing. But quite often a homeowner will go, well, wait a second, I didn't know you were going to drill the slab. I didn't know you were going to drill an expansion joint in a garage, or I didn't know you were going to trench right where I put my new mulch. A lot of sales inspectors are not always good at setting those expectations, because a lot of times they're more focused on the people side and actually closing the sale than they are explaining the intricacies of the service. So you really need to answer their questions and set the expectations up front, because the last thing you want to do is have a problem having drilled something that they didn't want drilled or something like that and then have to deal with it later. Step number 4, you're going to want to review the inspection graph again to verify its accuracy. Once again, I mentioned this earlier, your sales inspector goes out there, maybe he was in a little bit of hurry that day, maybe they didn't mark a couple things on there that should have been marked, or there's this nice patio block in the back on the porch that you really don't want to drill. There's things on there that's going to be an issue, and it's up to you as a technician to make sure that you detail the graph again and say, okay, this is pretty accurate, or this is what's different, and I got to make sure that this graph is amended to show that difference. Because the graph is going to be the document that's historical, that when we go forward 3, 4, 5 years down the road, this is going to tell us what we initially saw, what we initially did, and what the changes were in the future. Let's look at step number 5, which is going to be inspect the property for anything not on the graph. And we were kind of talking about this in the last slide, but here's some other ideas of things you can run into. You can run into things such as buried cable lines, wire pipes, and sprinkler systems, and they're all really easy to miss. And I can tell you, I've had problems with pretty much all these, especially the buried cable lines. I can't tell you how many times I've hit buried cable lines or sprinkler systems right up against the house, and you would think, well, I can just trench because surely somebody wouldn't have them within 12 to 18 inches of the house. Unfortunately, a lot of people will do their own work, and they'll set things up that are not necessarily by protocol, and also they won't use conduit. So when you go trenching with a pickaxe or even a shovel and you're digging in this dirt, it's real easy to sever these lines. And as you can imagine, there again, you're in another situation where you explain to the homeowner what happened, and no matter how you spin it, pretty much it's your fault because you should have known it. So make sure you inspect for these things before you just start digging. Step number 6, you want to check the soil to make sure it's not too wet. If the soil easily clumps in your hand, it's too wet to treat. And you're going to run across all different types of soils, especially if you're like me and you've worked in 5 or 6 different states. Currently, I'm in Florida and we have a lot of sandy soil in the area I'm in, so it's very easy for that soil to become too wet to apply termiticide. Also, where I'm at, it rains pretty much on a regular basis every day, so I've really got to watch and plan out my termite treatments based on the weather. So where I'm at in the summertime here, it rains pretty much every day, sometime between 4 and 6, really hard for about 15-20 minutes. We could very easily get an inch of rain. So I know when I'm going to do a termite treatment, I need to really get on it in the morning before those storms and that rain builds all day. But even clay, because I know a lot of areas in the southeast have clay. Clay, again, if it's so wet that you can just clump it real easy in your hand, that's going to be a problem. So look at the weather, follow the weather, and look at your conditions and also the types of soil you have, because each type of soil is different and needs to be treated differently. Our next section is going to be on calculations and equipment preparation. And I think this is one of the most imperative parts of the service, and it's one that a lot of people don't understand. First and foremost, if you don't understand how to calculate the amount of termiticide or prepare your equipment and site right, you're going to have some major issues. So let's first take a look at calculating the amount of termiticide. To calculate, you first need to add up the linear feet of the structure. And I'm going to show a graph after this slide showing that, but linear feet basically is going to be all 4 sides of the home added together. So if we start in the front right corner of the house and we work all 4 sides of the house, let's say the front of the house is 50 feet across, it's 40 feet back on the side, it's 50 across the back, and then 40 feet on the other side, we would actually have 180 linear feet. And then we'll talk about how to calculate that, but most termiticide labels are going to be 4 gallons per 10 linear feet. To me, it's very simple to understand this, because I would take that 180 linear feet, divide it by 10, and then times that number by 4. So that to me is the most simple way, because I'm taking that 180 linear feet, I'm splitting it up into 10-foot sections, which there's going to be 18 of them, and I take that 18 times 4. So just keep in mind there's different ways to do the math on this, but at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you apply the right amount of termiticide. Now, I will tell you this, if you're doing a full termite treatment, this is going to be different, because you would do 4 gallons per 10 linear feet on the outside of the house. You would drill into the hollow block and do 2 gallons per 10 linear feet. And then if it's a slab, you would drill even further under there and do another 4 gallons per 10 linear feet on the inside of the hollow block wall. So actually a full termite treatment could actually be 10 gallons per 10 linear feet. So each company is different. I know a lot of companies out there using Termidor, and they're doing what's called a Perimeter Plus, where you just do the 4 gallons per 10 linear feet. Some companies will use products like Premise and other products like that, and they'll do the whole 10 gallons per 10 linear feet. There's no right and wrong in this, and I think all the treatments can be effective. Keep in mind, you need to know what your company's policy is. And if I can tell you something as business owners and managers, you need to make sure that your technicians understand what your company's policy is and how to do it. Because I think it's real easy as managers and even business owners to think, well, I know this so well that when I teach it to somebody, I'm going to gloss over some of the details. And unfortunately, people that come from outside our industry, or even people that have been in the industry for a while, they don't understand these details unless you really explain them all and go through them step by step. So this is one of the most important areas in termite control, because if you don't calculate the product right, we're not going to get the intended result. Let's talk a little bit more about calculations. Obviously, we started talking about hollow block foundations in our last slide, and this is something you need to really take a look at. Hollow block foundations are only going to be 2 gallons per 10 linear feet. And this is so confusing for technicians I've seen through the years, because they'll think, okay, I'm going to use 4 gallons on the outside trench per 10 linear feet, then I'm going to drill into this block. Okay, I use 4 gallons per 10 linear feet. Or sometimes they'll think I use 1 gallon per 10 linear feet. There's all these confusing answers when I ask people the question. The bottom line is, let's say you're on the outside, you do a trench along the foundation. It takes you 2 minutes to treat that trench with the termiticide at the rate of 4 gallons per 10 linear feet. My question for you is, when you need to treat the hollow block and you drill into the hollow sides of each block, how many seconds would you spend treating that hollow block on the same 10 linear feet? Well, it's a simple mathematical equation, but the bottom line is that if it takes 2 minutes to treat the 10 feet with 4 gallons outside, you're going to treat 1 minute to get the 2 gallons per 10 linear feet on the hollow block foundation. A lot of people do not understand this, and a lot of technicians will get confused when they're doing the treatments, and they'll make mistakes on this. But just keep in mind, it's going to take half of the amount of time to treat the hollow block, per se, as it does to treat the actual trench that's open on the outside for that same 10 linear feet. Another thing that I know is confusing for a lot of people is when you angle drill through the outside, through the hollow block, and you drill all the way up under that slab inside. You're only going to do this on supported or floating slabs, because mono slabs, where they're poured, they're so thick on the edges, you wouldn't get your termiticide all the way in there anyways. So keep in mind that you're going to treat underneath these slabs at a rate of 4 gallons per 10 linear feet. So let's add that up in our mind. We're going to go ahead and we're going to treat the exterior trench at 4 gallons per 10 linear feet. We're going to treat the hollow block at 2 gallons per 10 linear feet, which gives us a total of 6 for those same 10 linear feet. Then we're going to add 4 more gallons as we angle drill and treat up under the slab, bringing us to a total of 10 gallons per 10 linear feet. And there are companies out there, again, that are just going to do the perimeter plus, the 4 gallons on the outside, which there's nothing wrong with that. And then, of course, there's also companies that want to do that full treatment at the full 10 gallons per 10 linear feet. I could say this 1,000 times, but keep in mind, managers, owners, trainers, you need to let people know every step of this and make sure they understand it. Make sure they can't just do it on paper, but you actually watch them and they show you and verify they know what they're doing. This is going to help you out in the future. Hopefully this takes you a little further on understanding how to treat each section of the home. To understand calculating the termiticides further, it's really important that you need to know the slab types. Number one, let's look at the monolithic slab. The monolithic slab is going to be a slab that actually is a one-pour slab, so it's not going to have an independent foundation wall or anything like that. The whole house actually sits on this slab. This is a very easy home to treat, because when we're treating this home, we're not really doing any drilling. All we can do is trench and treat in the soil. Now we can down drill the patios and slab porches against the house, but we're not going to do any drilling or treatment on the slab itself. Our second type of slab is a floating slab. This is where you actually have a footer poured. You have your block foundation that comes up, but then the slab is poured in the center of the foundation itself, and that's why it's called a floating slab, because it's not going to be supported by the foundation wall whatsoever. On a supported slab, it's going to be different, because the supported slab, we're actually going to notch out the hollow block, about half of it, and then pour the slab, and the slab itself is going to sit partially on the hollow block. So there again, with the floating slabs and supported slabs, you're going to be able to drill right through the hollow block and then further right up under that whole slab itself, and you can actually do the full termite treatments. In the next 3 slides, I'll show you the difference in the slabs and how you would treat each. On the monolithic slab, as you can see, this is going to be a 1-pour slab. So you can see as we look here on the outside of the slab itself, it's going to be really wide, especially as you go from the bottom up to the top and up to where the slab itself will start to come across the house. You can see this is a really wide poured slab. This is going to be much different than your other 2 because there's no way you're going to angle drill this from the outside. So in a lot of ways, this is going to be a pretty simple termite treatment because you're going to drill your outside patios, your outside porches vertically straight down, and then you're going to treat your trenches, but there's going to be no angle drilling into this slab or underneath the slab. As you can see also, there's no hollow block foundation. So obviously this is going to be important because you're going to use the 4 gallons per 10 linear feet on this house. So when you sell this job, you may add that in and say, hey, we're not going to use 10 gallons per 10 linear feet as we would on a supported or a floating slab because this is monolithic. So to me, this is your easiest type of home to treat because it is going to be less work. But keep in mind, the 4 gallons per 10 linear feet is going to cover everything you need. This gives you an idea here of a supported slab. As you can see in my illustration, there's a red arrow pointing to a specific area where the slab of the house is and where it meets the hollow block foundation. That arrow is showing you how you cut a little notch in the hollow block itself, and that slab actually sits and rests right on that notch in the hollow block foundation. That's something you need to know because here again is a home that you can do a full termite treatment on. So as you can see, I got 2 black arrows there. The first one at the top says hollow block 2 per 10. This is where you would drill from the outside into your hollow block and treat the block itself with 2 gallons per 10 linear feet. Underneath that's a second black arrow where you can see that it shows an under slab treatment. So now you've drilled all the way through the hollow block under the slab, and you're going to treat underneath that slab at 4 gallons per 10 linear feet. Keep in mind, I did this for illustration purposes, showing 2 different drill spots, but you would actually just use that first drill spot, the hollow block one, and continue with your bit all the way under, and then treat the block, and then as well as put a longer rod on and treat all the way up under the slab. But this gives you an idea of how and why you can do a full treatment when you're dealing with a supported slab. In this slide, we're actually looking at a floating slab. This is very similar to a supported slab in as much as you treat it the same way. And for time purposes, I'm not going to draw the arrows again, but as you can imagine on this slab, because it's just floating there in the middle and it's not a continuous 1-pour slab like a monolithic, you would take your drill and you would angle drill through that block, and then you would angle drill all the way down up underneath that slab. The one thing I want you to notice about this slab as well as the supported slab is that there is a way to tell without just looking at the house what these slabs are. You actually need to take a probing tool or a shovel, and there's a little arrow on the outside of this slab, as you can see, the arrow pointing down to the footer, and you actually need to dig a foot down and see if you hit that footer. And I got a little arrow showing the top of the footer there as well. So take a shovel and see if you hit a footer. If you hit a footer on any slab, it's not monolithic. It's either going to be floating or supported. And for our purposes in termite control, it doesn't really matter to us if it's floating or supported, but it does change how the termites can get inside the structure, and it also may change the way we decide in which to treat the structure itself. Let's talk a little bit about the application equipment itself. Obviously, there's going to be several pieces of equipment, and we're going to break them down through the next few slides. First, you need to know before leaving the office, make sure your truck is fully equipped. Let's take a look at what some of that equipment is. I can tell you there's nothing worse than getting out to a job site and not having the tools you need. Without the tools, you're never going to be able to complete the job no matter how good you are. You're going to need a toolbox. Most of the items needed on the job site are going to need to be carried in this toolbox. And there's so many things that could be in this toolbox, but I would definitely have some vice grips, some different socket wrenches, some box wrenches, screwdriver, a Phillips head, a flathead, so on and so forth. You're going to need the standard tools that you would probably have around your house in this toolbox. Next, our chemical tank, which a termite tank is mounted to the bed of a termite truck. Tank usually has a gas motor, a hose on a reel, and an application tool on the end of the hose to treat several different areas. Obviously, most of you are not going to get out to a job site without the standard things like the termite tank. I would add, in addition to this, you want to just make sure that you do maintenance on these tools and equipment regularly, because even if it's on there and you don't maintain it, you're going to have problems as you go out and do several jobs. C on our list is going to be a measuring stick. A 100-gallon measuring stick with 5-gallon marks to measure out the product in the tank. This is a good tool to carry. I know a lot of companies don't. I will say this, it will help you obviously with the 5-gallon marks to measure the product itself, because it can be really hard to see in the 100-gallon tanks. Like, you're looking from the outside trying to actually judge where the level is. But this will also help you stir the product up too, because one thing about doing a termite treatment is you don't want to put the product in with the water and it to not be mixed really well. I figured I'd quickly show you the slide of the actual termite rig and the wand itself. As you can see, the termite rig on the left is a pretty standard unit with the hose reel, the motor, and the big tanks. You're going to usually carry somewhere between 100 and 200 gallons of water in your termite rigs themselves, so that's something you have to decide. If you're going to do a lot of pre-treats, you may even want to get a 500-gallon termite rig. Obviously, at that point, you're going to need a larger truck as well. So, depending on what your company's strategy is or what you want to do, probably a 100-gallon tank for most termite companies will pretty much get them where they want to go. On the right side of this slide, you can also see the 4-in-1 termite tool. Once again, it's got the trigger, it's got a wand that goes down in the ground, and you can't really see it really well on here, but there's several different attachments depending on if you're treating down into a slab or if you're just treating a trench itself. So you're going to learn as you go through this process the different tools you have to treat different areas for termites. Looking further at application equipment, there is something called a ground fault interrupter, and it's a piece of equipment that makes sure electrical circuits are properly grounded and cuts the power off if the wiring is improper or if the tool develops a short. The reason why you use this is you don't want to get electrocuted, and I found something very interesting in the pest control industry in the past year. We actually have more people die in this industry of being electrocuted than we do vehicle accidents. And that really kind of surprised me, because I've always heard, wow, there's nothing more dangerous than driving in a vehicle. Well, in this industry there is, and it's actually the threat of being electrocuted. So the ground fault interrupter is obviously the little box you plug into the wall, and if there's any shorts or any problems anywhere in that line, it cuts the power to your equipment immediately. Another tool, obviously, that you're going to have to do termite work is going to be an electric drill. And the type of drill you're going to need is obviously going to be a brick or a concrete or masonry drill to be able to drill into brick veneer, block, and things like that. So a lot of people will call it a hammer drill as well, but you got to have the right drill and the right bits to be able to do the job. And I think some people laugh when I say this, but when I was in this industry, I was in it for several years before I started my own company. The company I worked for didn't do termite letters, didn't do pre-treatments, and I had never really done a full termite job with them. So when I started my business, I kind of had to self-teach myself just to know the simple and standard equipment you needed. So I always tell people, just make sure the people working for you understand that this is what you need, this is how it goes, because until you tell them or until they learn, they're really not going to know. And this is a picture of our standard termite drill. There's nothing complicated about it. It's a normal hammer drill. Obviously, you got the little handle on the side. And this is the drill you're going to use to drill vertically down into your slabs, whether it be inside the garage, the porches, or you're angle drilling from the outside to get through the hollow blocks and up and under the slab. I would suggest also as well that you keep sharp bits and extra bits on your trucks, because let's face the facts, you're drilling into masonry and concrete. You're going to have days where you do a ton of drilling and you're going to wear down the bits. So I would always keep extra bits on the truck, and a lot of times it would behoove you to keep an extra drill as well, because when we're out there treating, how often is it that we'll send two guys out on a job instead of one? And if that second drill was there, it'd be a whole lot easier for them both to stay busy. We talked a little earlier about the application tool, which is obviously used to apply the termiticides or liquids and foam. So that's something that's going to be standard on the truck, and I think that's something you're going to need to learn more hands-on than me continue to show you slides on it. A rake is another good tool as well, and they've got these rakes that actually are telescopic rods where you can fold them up and pull them out. This is a really good tool to move cellulose debris. We talked earlier about how cellulose sitting right on the ground is obviously a big problem in termite control. So having a rake's a good idea, and having one with a telescopic handle where if you want to make it 3 feet or you want to make it 4 or just 2 feet, you can take it down the crawl space and rake it out. Another set of tools you're going to need is cement and trowels. The pre-mixed cement is used to fill holes on porches and patios. The trowel helps smooth the cement over the holes. So as we talked about, we're going to be vertically drilling holes down into these slabs. We're obviously going to need to fill these holes in. Now, depending on what your company's process is, a lot of times you'll use plastic plugs to pound down in the holes, and then you'll cement right over those. Some companies will use a really thin drill bit where they don't have to put the plastic plugs in, and they just put the cement right over the holes. One way or the other, you're definitely going to want some ready mixed cement and a trowel to be able to fill those holes in. And again, the next line we've got here is the plastic plugs, and that's just depending on your company, but if you're using like the 5/8 inch holes or even 1/2 inch, you're definitely going to want to use the plastic plugs because the cement will just get swallowed up by the holes. Continuing talking about the application equipment, I was talking earlier about some of the tools you like to have in your toolbox, including the vice grips, pipe wrenches, and screwdrivers. These are obviously going to come in handy to make repairs or tighten fittings in the field. And when I say this, I can tell you I once had a huge chemical spill. I was working on a termite job in an area that was hilly. I had my truck parked on a hill, and I went in the back and I was treating a trench with my wand, and all of a sudden I was getting no pressure to my wand, but I could still hear the termite tank running out front. Well, I was kind of new to the industry, and I thought, well, I don't understand. So I kept messing around with the trigger and kind of, looking at the hose and everything. Little beknownst to me that around the front, my termiticide was going all over the road because one of the hoses had blown off the rig itself. It had actually blown the whole hose clamp off. So by the time I noticed it, I had a 30-gallon chemical spill and had a lot of issues I had to deal with. So the point of what I'm saying is that you don't know what tools you're going to need, and something as simple as having a small socket to put that hose clamp back on that day was really huge and really helped me out to get through what I was working on. Also, a water hose with a backflow preventer, about a 50-foot hose with a backflow preventer, is used to fill the termite tank. You never want to use the customer's hose, and you never want to use a hose without a backflow preventer. I'm sure most of you can answer the question as to why, but that backflow preventer allows the water to go into your tank but not to get sucked up back into the water supply. And this can easily happen because our water supply has pressure drops here and there to where it's almost some air getting in the lines, and then it'll actually suck back up like a siphon. So never use a termite hose without a backflow preventer because you could actually be poisoning somebody's drinking water. A utility light is also something I really like to carry on my termite truck because this helps you do a visual inspection of a crawl space, whether it's the completed work or just while you're doing the work itself. I know we did a ton of vapor barriers in my company I used to have, and encapsulations, and I remember we used miner lights on our heads and so many different things, but honestly I found that utility lights hooked up to electricity really sped up our work by about 33%. So Keep in mind, illuminating the area you're in is not just going to help you see things better, but it's also going to help you complete your work more quickly and efficiently. A spill cleanup kit, I don't even need to tell you how important this is because most of you, I'm sure, have had general pesticide training. Make sure your spill kit is in your truck and it's up to date. There's nothing worse than having a spill and not having what you need. Actually, last week I was sitting in an office and had a technician call up and say, "Hey, I got a chemical spill and I don't have any absorbent pads." Well, to me, that's the worst call I can get because the one thing I tell everybody working for me is make sure you have a spill kit because a spill can cause us the most amount of trouble of anything. Now, granted, if we're in a vehicle accident or somebody gets hurt, it can be worse. But as far as regulatory goes, there's nothing worse than having to call the state and say we have a chemical spill and we're cleaning it up and not be able to clean it up because we don't have the right spill cleanup stuff. So make sure you check your spill kit periodically, and whenever you have a spill and you clean it up, make sure immediately at the end of that day you go back and you order or go buy the equipment you need to refill your kit. And this is a picture of a standard spill kit, and as you can see, you've got your absorbent snake, you've got your broom and dustpan, you've got some gloves, and then you've got bags also to clean up soil or whatever it is you use to absorb the product. Or maybe you would use kitty litter. Everybody's got a different idea, and I'm not going to go deep into the spill kit because that's not what we're here for. But again, this would be a picture of your standard spill kit. Another important point in the termite treatment itself is going to be site preparation. This step should be done immediately before mixing or applying any termiticide. So if you haven't prepped your site, you're not ready to go. Don't even think about mixing or applying any termiticides because all you're going to do is continue to stop and have to go back and forth and back and forth. Number one, you want to rake and remove all cellulose debris along the foundation or in the crawl space. So obviously we don't want to go out and start treating with termiticide and then have to stop or spray cellulose debris down and then have to go right back in that termiticide and get it all over our bodies, removing those things. Step two, you want to drill the holes in the slab to treat the interior perimeter. So if you're going to be drilling any interior slab holes, make sure that you go ahead and drill those out immediately in the interior. Personally, 90% of the time, I never do that because I really like treating everything from the outside, but use your judgment on that depending on what your situation is. Next, you want to look, the holes you're going to drill are generally about 12 inches apart. Although there is some new technology out there in termiticides that may allow the holes to be drilled 24 inches apart. I don't know if those of you have heard of the Termidor HE, but the new label with that high efficiency Termidor is 24 inches apart. Also, you do about half the amount of trenching as well. So there's new technology out there all the time. Remember, the label's the law, and no matter what you do, you want to follow the label. But keep in mind the holes need to be drilled somewhere in the range of 12 to 24 inches apart. If drilling on the inside isn't possible, you can drill through the foundation wall from the outside, and this is known as horizontal short rodding. Once again, that's what I would use doing a full termite treatment anyways, because I have no desire to go inside somebody's house and drill through their slab just to get termiticide under the slab. And most people have nice floors or tile or something that they don't want you to drill through anyways. Again, preparing the structure for treatment, and we need to talk a little bit about this. You're really going to need to determine the depth of the footing of the structure. So when I say the depth of the footer, we talked about looking with a shovel and kind of digging down to make sure what type of slab it is. Well, we also need to know the depth of the footer because most termiticide labels are going to be 4 gallons per 10 linear feet to the depth of the footer. So if your footer is 2 foot deep, instead of being 4 gallons per 10 linear feet, you would actually go 8 gallons per 10. The most you can do on most termiticide labels is 16 gallons per 10 linear feet. So if your footer you believe is more than 4 feet deep, you never want to go over 16 per 10. And this is something I'm not going to dig real deep into in this class, but just keep in mind that if you have a basement or you have a crawl space that seems to go pretty low underground, You can have footers that are anywhere from 2 to 10 foot deep. So look at the outside grade, look inside your crawl space or basement, and get an idea of where you think that footer is. It's going to be somewhat of a guessing game. You're not always going to know, but just keep in mind that as you do the treatment, you're going to treat the trench outside, then you're going to push your wand about a foot deep, and then you're going to treat that second level, and then so on and so forth, depending on the depth of the footer. So you're going to use your rod, and every 12 inches of depth, you're going to push that rod down and in there. Some of you are going to be in areas where there's basements, and you're going to be doing the 16x10 on a regular basis. One thing that can be confusing is if you live in a hilly area, part of the house might only be where the footer is the 1 foot depth, where you would use the 4 gallons per 10 linear feet, and then one side of the house may be the 16x10 because the footer is 8 foot deep. That's where you've really got to calculate the whole structure itself and look at how the grade changes along the front, back, or sides of the house and get a better idea of what your calculation needs to be. Step 2, you want to determine which of the two possible treatments are best for the structure, trenching and rotting or treated backfill. And I can tell you this, trenching and rotting is going to be most of the time your best treatment. The only time you'd use treated backfill is if you really thought there was something on the property like a well or cistern or something that you needed to actually pull the soil out, put it on a tarp, treat the soil, and then lay the soil back in. So I would say 99% of your treatment is going to be trenching and rotting. But here again, we need to go back to that graph. We need to look at things and go, oh, there's a well on this property. That's where we're going to use the treated backfill method instead of the trenching and the rotting. Let's talk about mixing termiticides. First of all, we want to use some precautions while mixing chemicals. You always want to wear goggles and unlined gloves. And I think this is a pretty simple thing, but it's very easy for termiticides or any pesticides in general to splash up and get in your eyes. Your eyes are going to be pretty much your most susceptible area of getting pesticides in your body. Always use the backflow preventer, as we talked about, to make sure that your termiticide doesn't get sucked up into the water supply. And never drop your hose in the liquid tank, and always hold the hose above the line when adding water. How many people are guilty of just putting your hose down in the tank and letting it fill while you go do something else around the house and that hose actually gets submerged down in the termiticide itself? That's pretty common practice, so make sure you stand there and fill your tank. The steps in mixing termiticides are as follows. Step 1, you want to fill the tank 1/4 to 1/3 full of water. Step 2, start the pump to begin to bypass agitation and place the end of the treating tool into the tank to allow circulation. Step 3, add the remaining amount of water. Step 4, let the pump run and allow circulation through the hose for 2 to 3 minutes. Remember to never mix the products before reaching the treatment site. And I want to just take a look at one thing there, because after you fill your water tank 1/4 to 1/3 full, and then you actually put your wand down in the tank and let it run for about 2 to 3 minutes, this allows the pump to run and allows you to actually mix the termiticide really well. And this is something most of us are guilty of. We haven't really taken that 2 to 3 minutes to actually spray down into the tank and let that product circulate. Once again, never mix the termiticides before you get to the treatment site. As we well know, one accident and you've got a big problem on your hands. Let's review what we've just learned. There are 2 types of termite treatments. They're going to be pre-construction and post-construction treatments. It is imperative to remove all cellulose debris before beginning any treatment. Always review and verify accuracy of the graph before beginning any treatment. The most important piece of paperwork on any treatment is going to be your graph. You always want to set the expectations and answer any questions the customer may have before beginning work. You will need to confirm the slab type before treating. Hollow block is always treated at a rate of 2 gallons per 10 linear feet. Monolithic slabs are treated at 4 gallons per 10 linear feet and require no drilling. Always check your tools before leaving the office. Maintain your equipment on a regular basis. Always mix termiticides properly with the right safety equipment. And most important of all, don't stop learning, because as soon as you think you know it all is when you get in trouble. You're never going to know everything you need to know about termites, but continue to learn and be the best you can be out there in this industry. For those of you interested in entomologist certification, please email me bigbearshawn@yahoo.com. Also, please take the test to complete this course, and thank you for choosing Reeves Professional Education Services.